Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to High Intensity Business, your one-stop shop for growing your strength training business and fueling your passion for high intensity training. Today's podcast is a throwback membership episode, private membership episode with Simon Shawcross on how to instruct a HIIT workout. Simon is the founder of HITuni, a specialist education platform for fitness professionals and enthusiasts who want to master high intensity training. Simon has personally supervised over 20,000 HIIT sessions and interviewed hundreds of trainers. This particular piece of content got fantastic praise when it was published inside the membership. And I always remember kind words and great feedback from Owen Dockham, who then went on to grow Live Oak Strength into $1 million studio. And I know he puts his trainers through HITuni, as do many of my colleagues in high intensity training. HITuni is their go-to place for training up their trainers and themselves in high intensity training skills. This particular membership content was actually recorded in two parts, but we've stitched it together for this particular podcast. Please note this is audio only, so this is the only actual video part. If you're on a video platform, the rest will probably be a still image and will just be audio only for the rest of the content. People frequently ask me, what certification do they need to start a strength training business? And for over 10 years, I have proudly recommended HITuni. Their courses are bespoke to high intensity training, the only ones that are extremely enjoyable and very, very practical, perfect for HIIT trainers. So if you or your team would like to do a course, please use the code HIB10 and you will get 10% off your next purchase. So I'll repeat that. Use the code HIB, that stands for High Intensity Business, HIB10, and you will get 10% off your next course purchase. And there'll probably be a link below as well. So now, without any further ado, please enjoy how Simon instructs a HIIT workout. Simon, welcome back to Corporate Warrior.
Glad to be back, Lawrence. How are you?
I am very good. I have a new dog and she's lovely.
Fantastic. She's beautiful. I can back that up.
I'm hoping that she doesn't distract me during this podcast. So this is the first test to see if I can actually do a podcast with her in the background. I have plenty of guests with dogs who I've had to cope with during an interview, so I'm sure I'll be fine. So you've obviously, as the listeners will know, you've got tons of experience as a personal trainer yourself. You've put thousands and thousands of people through high intensity training workouts. And now obviously you have HITuni, where you're creating courses and helping people become great high intensity training trainers, or high intensity trainers, I should say. So I thought you'd be perfect to obviously discuss the topic of how to instruct the perfect workout. So do you want to just kick off with giving an overview of how you might instruct a great workout for a client in terms of the kind of method you would take?
One thing to preface this with is that it is really individual. So every person you have walk through your door is going to need a slightly adapted coaching style to get the best out of that particular individual who stood right in front of you. And then you've got things like differences between whether they're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, and so on. And the instruction style can be very different based on somebody's part of the journey that they're on in their understanding of high intensity exercise. And then you can talk about the differences of working with a 14-year-old versus working with an 80-year-old and so on. So it's very individual depending on who is stood right in front of you at this moment in time. Now, having said that, I think probably the two key things from just a perspective of getting the best out of the individual in front of you is developing the rapport with the person you're speaking to and you're going to be coaching, and then having a calmness about your instruction and about your manner that reinforces the person's belief in you as a trainer. So one thing I find new trainers can do a little bit too much to start off with, they feel the need to fill space the whole time. They feel the need to be constantly appearing to do something, whether that's fiddling with a clipboard or constantly verbally talking all of the time. They feel this need that the client doesn't perceive a value unless there's this almost constant chitter chatter and or physical action. Now, to me, when I see that in a trainer, that doesn't inspire confidence. That makes me feel like there's somebody who's a little bit new to this. They don't quite fill their space and feel comfortable within their place, within the environment, within the gym, within the workout that's being instructed. So one thing that I think super key is especially for new instructors, is to breathe, calm things down, slow things down a little bit, and then you will be able to communicate in a manner that really suits this type of exercise. Because this isn't, come into the gym and do some jerking around and super fast reps and need a cheerleader to shout you on for your workout. This is a type of exercise that in many ways, when it's done well, is very meditative and focused, mentally and physiologically focused as you're doing it. And that doesn't get assisted by somebody who's fidgeting around and verbally excessively talking and or instructing too much. And the other thing that's a mannerism that new instructors can do with this is to look down at their clipboard too much, or they feel uncomfortable looking specifically at the individual working out. And instead, I'll notice they're looking at the weight stack going up and down. They know they need to be looking at something in that general direction, but they feel kind of awkward staring at a person in front of them. So they're like observing the weight stack, or they're observing the movement arm of the machine rather than the individual who's making that movement arm or that machine move or that weight stack move. And it's a big mistake, because there is so much to observe in the individual, from the joints, from the working muscles around those joints to their face, how you sense that person is feeling in that moment in the workout. So I think one thing, especially for new instructors, would be to calm down, make sure you're observing the individual in front of you, and to be really clear in what it is that you want to say and communicate to that particular individual.
Awesome. I love that. And it was only recently, actually, I was training someone, and I felt these exact thoughts came up for me. It was kind of like, okay, what do I say now at certain points of the exercise? And I kind of thought to myself, no, less is more. Less is more. Like they're doing exactly what I've asked them to do. Their form is perfect. There's no reason to say anything, and there's only perhaps a reason to say something if I feel like it will help. So do you want to just elaborate on the type of language that you would use? I mean, I know when you trained me that time, is the first time I heard someone describe the turnarounds at either end of the movement as looping, which I really liked. So I just wanted you to elaborate on the kind of language you might use when you train someone, and what to avoid as well.
Okay. I think a key thing, both from a psychological perspective and from a taking action perspective, in terms of the client physiologically taking action, is to always use positive language. So instead of saying to somebody, don't go so fast, say, slow down. So you're not using the negative. The negative, A, is, negative. And B, it takes a translation in the mind to turn that into an action. So when a person hears, don't go so fast, okay, Lawrence is telling me don't go so fast, which means, okay, I need to slow down. And especially in the heat of a moment of a high intensity set, where fatigue is building up, you're getting these sensations of discomfort. Your mind, especially in the beginner, might be looking for distraction and to get away. Having to process this sort of extra mental pattern, instruction, and turn it into an action just delays everything. And the client may be beyond being capable of making that change at that point. or it comes a little bit later than ideally you'd want as the instructor. So always use positive language. So tell them directly what it is you want them to do in that moment. And then their brain goes, Lawrence wants me to slow down. Boom, done. That happens in a second, in a microsecond. In terms of language, like you mentioned, like phrases like looping, I think it's finding words or using words that visually describe what you physiologically want to happen. And you might find certain words work better for certain individuals. And then you'll see it, because you'll see them translate what you're asking them to do into action really, really effectively. And you might use an instruction that you've used on another client, and it's a good instruction, or potentially should be a good instruction, but doesn't have the same impact on the client. So another thing to do is to be really aware of the instructions that you see the client in front of you getting and being able to turn into action. And if you see there's an instruction that doesn't work for them, use another one with the same message. So you're creating a palette, that a verbal and auditory palette that specifically works for that person that you're training. And you have to write it down. You write all this stuff down for each client you have. You just store it in your brain, and you have it to go to the next time somebody trains. So in terms of the language or the specific words for different parts of the movement, I think it's just finding things that people go, oh yeah, like a loop, that makes sense. I know a loop doesn't stop. It's not jaggedy. There's no pause. A loop's like the infinity figure eight. It's like you loop at one end, you flow back, you loop at the other end. So these types of words just make sense to the protocol or the style of exercise we're performing. And, there's tons of them for different parts of the movement and for different exercises. And, we've got lists of them in the HITuni courses, and it's learning to become comfortable with those words and that language, because it will feel, a little bit awkward sometimes if it's a word you're not used to saying. You will say things negatively sometimes, just because you do. And when you catch yourself doing that, the best thing to do is just remind yourself, next time I want to say it. So it's direct instruction, but it's direct, clear, and verbally accurate and concise will get the best out of a client.
Love it. Yeah. Adapting one's lexicon to the client and getting them the best results is definitely the aim. One thing I've noticed is, obviously people that start high intensity training for the first time may struggle with the type of breathing that we advocate, the natural breathing, that we talk about, because people are kind of used to, in a lot of cases, especially if they come from a more traditional weightlifting background, they're used to the, exhale on the concentric and the inhale on the eccentric, which we don't necessarily want to do, because especially if the cadence is slow, it's not going to really make a great deal of sense. So when you see that type of breathing happening, when you see a breathing pattern that's too much like that, and you're trying to make it a bit slower and a bit more productive, how do you instruct that in the moment?
In the moment. So let's just run that back. So somebody who, are they breathing too fast, or are they starting to Valsalva and hold their breath in the moment? What specifically?
Well, not necessarily, but they might be. They might be at times doing a Valsalva maneuver or getting close to doing that. But if they're not doing that, they might be doing like a, just like, for instance, on the concentric, they might be just moving a little too fast and then doing kind of a full exhale rather than but more just a, and actually, might be answering my own question, because if you do slow down the exercise, the breathing you'd hope would sometimes correlate with that. But I just sometimes notice I find it sometimes quite difficult to get people to breathe naturally. Think a la, like, I at first straight away think Doug McGuff in a lot of his Body by Science videos on YouTube. He's very stoic face, slack jaw, breathing in and out very, deeply and rhythmically and natural. And then as the set builds up where he's more fatigued, then obviously forced hyperventilation sets in order to get the most out the end of the set. So I guess
Well, that in Doug's case has years of practice.
right. Well, that's a good point. So maybe that's something to think about, that it takes an experienced trainee to get there. But how would you best, okay, better question it might be, how would you best instruct a trainee to breathe in the most appropriate manner? What words would you use when
I
instructing
think
a trainee?
the key thing is when it's somebody new is that before they even get on the equipment, this is would be one of my absolute key teaching points is the breathing pattern you're expecting them to use and you need them to use during the exercise or the exercises they're going to do in the routine. That would be one of my absolute fundamentals of an initial session, explaining that really, really clearly to them, how I would expect them to breathe. Now, it's a completely uninstinctive thing to do, to breathe in this manner when you're using a load that feels heavy to you. Instinctively, all you want to do is shut down, brace up, and Valsalva to get that load to move. So when somebody's brand new to exercise, they're just doing what's hardwired into their physiology, into their central nervous system. That's how the body, unless somebody's been doing this type of exercise or something similar, so perhaps a yoga practice or something where they've learned to be a little bit more in control of their breathing and physiology at the same time, is going to tense up and look to shut down their breathing rate. So I would just be like super observant and remind them, pre-remind them, if that's a thing, before they start an exercise, that about halfway through, when things start to feel a little bit challenging, one of the things I can pretty much guarantee you're going to do is to want to hold your breath to start with. And what I need for you to do is to always keep breathing, to always be breathing. And just to reinforce that instruction in your initial chat with them, before they get on the particular exercise, and then you pre-warn them. So the moment you mention it, when they start to do it in the exercise, they're primed for you to tell them that. And you're telling them that right then. So then, okay, Laura said this was going to happen. It's happening. Okay, I know what I need to do to please my trainer right now. So,
Awesome.
yeah, it's pre-warning them, preparing them, and then getting them to do that in the moment, and then reminding them, and then never letting it fly during the exercise. It's like the moment as a trainer you let that kind of thing fly, then it's a road to all sorts of shenanigans happening, which you want to avoid as a trainer and as the client.
So just to elaborate on that, if you see it once, you see bad breathing habits once, and you check in and say, let's say you've already you've instructed at the start, and you've also reminded them throughout the workout, and then towards the end of the set they resume bad breathing habits, you would continue to remind them. You won't back off, because it's obviously a pretty important thing to try and improve. No,
no, I wouldn't back off. No,
right,
I think that's something. I think to the extent where if that continues to happen after the corrective instruction, I'd say, well, let's stop the exercise, gently bring that load down. Do you remember that thing I was talking about before we started the workout about the breathing? At the moment, that's not happening. And what that's going to do when you start to hold your breath, it'll make it feel easier in the moment. It is making the exercise easier for you muscularly. So it's not doing what we want it to do. And you're kind of taking a little bit of a risk because you're driving up blood pressure. One of the purposes of this type of exercise is that we're keeping the risk factors really low, and we're keeping your blood pressure at a fairly normal level during the exercise. But the moment you hold your breath, that's going to spike. And so this is really important that we keep you breathing through that. So re-impress why you're having, or the reasons for them doing this type of breathing. It's not just some thing that you're being a stick in the mud about. It's something that has a very real physiologic impact on the person, on the training style. And it's one of those things, it's, to me, those first, depending on the individual, 4 to 4 to 10 sessions, there's so much learning and so much sort of instinctive behavior that needs unpicking with high intensity training, that all of these things you can expect to happen for the vast majority of people. And your role in those first 4 to 10 sessions is to unpick and remind and improve or change those behaviors under load. And so you're bypassing the instincts. You're helping the individual bypass their instincts. And once they've got, for some people, they might get it in 2 or 3 sessions. For others at the other end of the spectrum, you might be going on longer than 10 sessions, just because some people are not as in control of their physiology, sort of almost not in their physiology at all when they start with you. And some individuals will take longer, but you just need to stick on it with all of your clients.
I like it. So you're kind of beating dog tracks into the mind.
Yeah. It's really instinctive. It is. It's like training, training your dog. It's like, you need for this to happen. In many ways, a trainer's role is to become the individual's brain during exercise. You are taking a meta position to them. You're outside their physiology. You're outside the workout, the direct physical experience of the workout. You can be a much calmer voice and somebody with years of experience giving the advice that's needed. You can become the brain that enables them to have the kind of workout you want them to have.
In those moments where you do have to stop them because they're not following instructions very well and it could be dangerous, for instance, holding their breath, and you stop the workout, you tell them to set the weight down, what type of, will you use quite a stern tone, or will you be very kind of polite and relaxed in your kind of reiteration of the principles you've already said, and trying to really hammer that home before you commence the next set? Because I imagine for some instructors, and I've been in this position, it can get a little bit frustrating when you're dealing with someone who's particularly hard to instruct, and it can be tempting to kind of be a bit stroppy with them. So what might your tone be? I mean, when you're in that type of situation, how might you deliver that?
Like we started off this conversation saying, I think the key thing is to remain calm and to have a calm manner about your instruction at all times, and then adapt that baseline state to the individual in front of you. So some people might be almost apologetic that they've done that and need just a very gentle coaxing to get it right. Other people might be annoyed that you pointed out, or annoyed that you stopped their set, that you point out, and you might need to be a little more brusque with that type of individual, a little bit more direct. Some people might be testing you as a trainer. When people first come in, they, sometimes they want to almost show off what they can do, or they have other motivations that might be subconscious motivations, but they have other motivations for coming to you other than, wanting the best possible training experience or wanting the best trainer. And these are things, it's like the teacher's pet versus the naughty kid at the back of the class. It's like there are all these different mindsets that clients can come to you with. So I would say remain calm, and then you change your tone or your pitch or your attitude to a degree to that individual in front of you. Some individuals might almost need a short, sharp shock of like, come on, you need to focus on this. This is really important. And, if we don't get this right, we're going to need to just continue doing the leg press or just continue doing the pull down, this one exercise until we crack this, something that, not that I'd necessarily do actually follow through on that, but it's something that makes you think, oh God, I want to do other exercise. I want to have a proper workout, because that's the other thing with new clients is they have a tendency to be in a rush to do everything. They want to have, especially if they've heard about high intensity training and they come to do high intensity training rather than just coming to you because you're a trainer and they don't know anything more about you than that. If they come to you with that perspective of, I want a HIT workout, what they'll typically do is want to have that experience almost in the first session. And they'll attach themselves to the intensity part that they've read and heard about rather than the safety and efficiency aspects of this type of exercise, which come to me, the intensity part comes because of the safety and the efficiency factors of a workout, not the other way around. And if you go about it from the other way around, then, your workout's going to resemble something more like CrossFit. Whereas if you come from it from a high intensity training perspective, it's going to be this cleaner, more focused, more efficient type of protocol, which is really what you want the individual to have. You've had to be experienced, but you're looking for them to have this sort of very clean, precise, focused, and that intensity at the end of the exercise, that last 10, 20 seconds of the set, getting them to that place calmly, and then them enjoying or learning to tolerate, if not enjoy, that part of the set. I think that's the key thing as the trainer, is to get a person to that place. And that's what needs to be done from your perspective as a trainer. And the client might not always get that when they first come to you, but that's part of your role as a coach. Part of your role as an instructor is to get them to get why that's important. So they understand the purpose. You're not asking them to do these things for fun or frivolity, or you're not looking to be a stick in the mud about it. It's just like, you are going to have a better experience. It's like, I wouldn't walk into a Michelin-starred chef's kitchen and start telling him how to prepare my meal. I want to experience what this guy who's dedicated his life to creating awesome meals, I want to experience what his interpretation of food is. That's kind of a relationship I'd be looking to foster with clients, particularly new clients.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. Yeah, I completely agree. Final question, Simon, for this kind of, I guess, part one, because there's a lot we didn't cover, and maybe we could do a part two to cover that off. Last question really is how do you, at the end of the set, we want our clients to reach momentary muscular failure, obviously in the safest way possible, because we know that that's probably the most potent part of the workout, the part of the stimulus that's the most important in terms of triggering a lot of the positive adaptations that we want, such as muscle hypertrophy and bone mineral density and all the rest of it. So how do you, in your experience, what kind of language instruction do you use at that final section of a set to really make sure your clients are using absolute maximum intensity?
Go faster. Go as fast as you possibly can. It's not an instruction I would typically use with somebody who's new. Okay, I think you have to develop the skills to use that instruction. But ultimately, what you want a client to be able to do in the last seconds of the workout is to attempt to move the load as fast as possible. When you get your timing right on that instruction, the external speed won't change. It'll still be slowing down, if anything. But that instruction is what will help, and the following through that instruction is what will cause all the motor units to be engaged and all of them to be firing optimally before fatigue sets in, which means that you can no longer produce force but will keep moving going with the given load that you've got. So that would be my key instruction, is when I know they've got the behaviors, when I know they've got the breathing, when I know they've got the ability to perform the exercise with smooth controlled turnarounds and to contract the targeted musculature and to be really mentally focused in on the targeted musculature we're performing the exercise for, then my encouragement at the very end of the set would be to move as fast as possible. But you've got to get the timing of that instruction right. You do it too soon, they are going to go faster. You judge that moment just right, they're going to maybe continue to get another third, half, even whole rep, perhaps concentric part of a rep by doing that. And they will have optimized the firing rate of all the motor units involved in the exercise. That would be that typically wouldn't come, I think, on an average client. I wouldn't start to use that instruction for maybe 10 workouts or so, because those initial workouts we're having with you, and again, it's very individual. It could be 2 workouts for some people, and who are just really in their physiology, their central nervous system is awesome, and their mental engagement, psychological engagement for process is awesome. When you've got those 2 factors combined, it might only take them 2 or 3, 4 workouts to get the fundamentals right, versus somebody at the other end of the spectrum who might take much longer. But when a person is capable, that's what I'd be looking to instruct at the end of the set. Until that point, this is what I was getting around to. Until that point, it's practice. For me, it's practice, it's refinement of the skills that are going to keep you safe when you are capable, that will keep you safe, that will get you to become capable of executing the end of a set in that manner.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I do the same thing. And I do the same thing when I train myself. I think it's really important to underscore, though, something, especially for those that are perhaps new to this type of training or instructing this type of training, is that if you're so fatigued, which you will be by the end of a high intensity set, by moving fast, you're very unlikely to injure yourself, because you won't be able to move fast. You'll be trying to move fast, but you're actually moving very slowly. And just to also underscore, we're still advocating smooth turnarounds during this latter part of the set. It's just really that kind of middle portion.
Well, that instruction would specifically be used on the concentric. You wouldn't use that instruction. That certainly wouldn't be a goal of the eccentric portion of the movement. So absolutely, really good point. It's like that instruction would be used on the concentric to enable somebody to get to the end or as much of a way through that concentric as possible. When they turn around, by the time they get to the turnaround, it needs to be as controlled as any. So that instruction, really, it's almost like you'd be surprised for them to get to the end of that rep. And if they do, and this is stuff where you need to sit down with the person in advance and talk about this style of technique, is by the time they do they need to be as in control of that turnaround as on any other rep. And like you mentioned, Lawrence, it's the speed externally shouldn't be actually increasing at all, even though the instruction is to move faster. The speed should be remaining flat. And, as you get closer to full fatigue, that slowing down, and then controlled turnaround, controlled eccentric, absolutely critical. Yeah.
Now, as someone who's trained many, many people and supervised thousands of workouts, what should new trainers be thinking about when training men and women? Is there any differences that we need to think about, or ways we can be more effective at training the different genders?
I think a big starting point is, how has that client come to you? Have they come to you because they've seen something about high intensity training online, or they've read Body by Science, and they come into you sort of forewarned and forearmed? They're, as it were, a more educated client, or are they somebody who's just happened to found you're the local facility or the local trainer, and that's the reason they're turning up on your doorstep? And the reason I mention that, it doesn't necessarily make a huge difference, but let's take guys to start off with. When you're working with guys, especially as a male trainer, and actually, you know what, maybe even more so with a female trainer, sometimes there's something about the male-driven ego and the desire to be macho that will make guys look to work beyond their bounds, especially sort of during a first or second session. They want to kind of show off how much they can lift, how strong they are, and how capable they are. Whereas women are far less likely to have that tendency. In many ways, they're more receptive, can be more receptive to the message of high intensity training and, quality of turnarounds and control of movement, and all of that intrinsic stuff comes first and the external comes as a byproduct of that. Whereas many guys, to start off with, are coming from the reverse perspective. They want to show sort of how much they can do, how much they can push and lift and their strength. So that is something that I think is or can be a specific difference between training men and women. And that then therefore requires a little bit of extra special attention to the guys in explaining how, look, this isn't about hoiking out reps like you may have had experience or you may have seen your mates do at the gym in the past. This is more about these factors, and this is what I need to see you doing really well on. Outside of that, there's, I suppose, another thing to be aware of is the male-female dynamic. So whether that's a woman training, a woman trainer training a male client, or a man training a woman. So there is sort of like a sexual dynamic, sexual as in opposite sexes dynamic going on there. And some clients, some men prefer being trained by a guy or a woman, and vice versa. And it's just like finding a rhythm that works for the person you're with, because obviously you can't easily change your own sex. So you are who you are. So it's about working with that client. It is possible nowadays, but it's, it might be something that you transition over a period of time rather than you get the opportunity to deal with in the moment. So when you're working with somebody, I think, if you're in the luxury of it, if you're not just working by yourself and you have male and female trainers, that's something you can actually tailor to the client in front of you as the owner of a facility. You can say, this person gets the best when they're working with X. I mean, to me, when I'm trained by other people, it makes no difference whatsoever. All I'm interested in is can you motivate me? Can you excite me in the workout? Can I feel your passion for the exercise you're teaching? And are you appropriate in the language you use to enable me to get the most out of a workout? And whether that's coming from a man or a woman makes absolutely no difference whatsoever to me, but it does to some people. So that is worth considering. And that's also something as a trainer that's worth considering for your target audience, because there are, let's say, for instance, there are some women who would prefer to be trained by another woman and would feel uncomfortable about being trained by a guy, at least initially, and perhaps even more so in a one-on-one personal training environment. And so if you're a female trainer who's starting out your own business as a HIT trainer, then that's a niche that you can go out and target, because you can service the needs of those clients. Whereas, probably 70% of the trainers in your area are guys, and therefore you have a little ready inbuilt niche. So I think these are things worth considering. To me, ultimately, at the end of the day, when all this stuff is kind of figured out, it doesn't really make a difference, but it can do to start off with. And it's just about sort of bridging the gap and learning how to be comfortable and lucid in your, as a trainer, in your ability to coach either of the sexes.
Yeah, and I think you raised a good point there about the market opportunity in terms of if you're a woman or a man and that's a trainer, and the majority of your competition are the opposite sex, then that could serve as a differentiator, and you could choose to target target men or women. But I think the important thing to also realize is the target market is not your total market. So obviously you're still going to attract people outside that target. I think people get a little bit worried about alienating the rest of the market, and then they make the wrong decision of trying to target everybody. And I don't think that works very well either. Awesome. That was a really good way to start us off. So one of the things I'm really also interested in learning from you, Simon, is how do you, when it comes to tracking, workouts, there are a number of different methods people employ: stopwatches, wristwatches, clipboards, apps. What's your thoughts on all this stuff? Like, what are your kind of recommendations when it comes to tracking performance?
What I found that I personally found that easiest to work with is just a straight up stopwatch and just track the metric of time under load. Some people prefer to count reps. What I found is so long as that person's reps are under control, and they're good reps, I'm just looking for that individual to reach a fairly broad parameter time under load. And I'm not I don't find it necessary to count reps at the same time. Although having said that, you can do the click counter as well. So if you've got a click counter on your finger, you can time with the stopwatch on the one hand and then the click counter to count the reps as well, which will give you more detailed and accurate breakdown ultimately, which can be useful, I would say, for trainers who are sort of maybe even newer. So people who haven't seen it all yet. And so long as tracking those metrics is within your ability, because remember, you've got to be coaching, you've got to be watching, observing, and clicking a click counter and starting and stopping a stopwatch. So long as you're confident in doing all of those things at approximately the same time, then in some ways, the more metrics you gather, the better as a new trainer, because it gives you more information. It lets you know, so for instance, the tempo of the reps at the start of the set compared to the end. Is that person changing over time? Are you missing things visually that are actually happening in front of you, but are perhaps too small for you to observe? I think that's useful as a beginner trainer, an intermediate trainer, and sometimes to just sort of check yourself as a advanced trainer. At the end of the day, it is possible to get too bogged down in all of this. And what's really important is the client's safety and the client's experience. And if you've got those two things covered, and you're then getting them as close to momentary muscular failure as that individual in front of you is currently capable of getting, in a time frame where at one end of the spectrum it's not so heavy, they start to tense up and use body English to lift the load. And it's not so long that they start to get bored, and then the onset fatigue is really uncomfortable because it just goes on for so long. Then really, from perspective of the research and what I've seen with clients, is that you've done everything you can. And whether that was done in 5 reps, a tempo of 6-6 or a tempo of 8-8 matters not. So you can get bogged down in metrics, but I do think it's useful to start off with. And if you've got equipment which sort of automatically tracks those metrics for you, great, because that's something that's being taken off your, if you've got a computer screen and a force gauge readout that's happening all the time, and that's being tracked for you, you can look at it afterwards, even better, because it's less for you to have to deal with in the moment. I think it's really key. And this is something I consider a very important point for trainers, is that you don't get bogged down in the minutiae when you're meant to be coaching the client in front of you, when it's about their experience. And one thing I do see sometimes with new trainers is they're using the clipboard and the stopwatch and the rep counter as a crutch to hide behind, because they haven't found their confidence as a coach yet. And that doesn't come across as great. And they might be aiming to look scientific or feel sort of like a lab technician in a white coat with all their data they're collating. Remember, it is about that client's experience and your ability to coach that client. And that's really important. And so do be aware that these things these toys, these metrics can actually get in the way of a good experience, as well as tell us about how good the experience is. So it's about finding a balance between the two places. In terms of clipboard or what, I like Google Sheets in an app, because I don't think using Google Sheets as a way of keeping all the metrics, because then you can keep it on Drive and you can share it between all your trainers and all of that stuff.
Love me some Google Sheets.
I don't think, to my knowledge, there's not an app out there I'm really happy with that does what I can do with Google Sheets. So it is that simple. Like you said, you love them. It's like it works, and it's simple, and it can be shared across trainers. So I would say that's a really good way of doing it. But some people are old school. They're like, pencil and paper, and that can work too. I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule. It depends with what you're comfortable with. It is quite cool at the end of the day if you've got a watch of papers of all your clients to look through if you're a very sort of kinesthetic, physical touch person. So whatever works for you, really, to keep those made. But I think so long as you do, you need to keep some information on the client so that you can look at their progress over the long term and get a sense of what works better for that individual and what might not work quite as well for that individual.
Yeah, I think I know that I was talking to Dr. Doug McGuff and Luke Carlson about an app. I think he might have even finished up the creation of some app to track these metrics. Because I know what you mean. There's a lot of, and I need to find out. I know I need to get back to Luke, actually, an email about that. But there's a lot of apps that have attempted, I think, serve this function, and it doesn't seem like anything's really caught on yet. I was actually talking to one lady on email, and I think she was a software developer kind of background, and she was really into high intensity training. She seemed to she had a prototype app, and she seemed to really be determined to turn it into something. And I'm not sure what's happened to that. But there's certainly an opportunity there. If someone can get the feel right and nail it, it's certainly worth looking at. But yeah, until that happens, Google Sheets is an obvious go-to because it's free and it's accessible over multiple devices, and it's what I use for clients and also myself. My own progress. So no, I think that's good advice. So stopwatch, counter, clipboard, or Google Sheets. I suppose you'd want to use clipboard in the moment because then you can just write it down and perhaps update Google Sheets later or update whatever system you use later on, perhaps, and maybe schedule time to do that. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, I remember at Keyser they had the physical cards where you'd write down your numbers, and I did enjoy, as archaic as it sounds, I did enjoy writing it down and then looking at them back and seeing like my strength go up like 150% or something like that.
It's a moment in time captured.
Right.
Whereas a Google Sheet, you look back and it's digital. It's all digital. Whereas if you put your own handwriting, writing in the time under load and the weight you were using and all of that, there's something more, a sense of time about the thing. So yeah, it can be cool.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So all right, let's talk about progress. So I think this is a common challenge people have, in terms of knowing when you're instructing workouts, knowing when to change the workouts to optimize results for your clients. There's a lot of variables in play: stress, sleep, diet, genetics, fill in the blank. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to know when to add recovery or change a workout. So I guess this is slightly outside of the realm of instructing workouts, but I just like to hear what your view is on that and how you personally have managed that to help clients continue to progress.
If most of your clients are on a once a week schedule, I think you don't have to be particularly concerned about optimizing or drawing back frequency, because they're already on what I would consider to be pretty much a minimum effective dose. I think once you start getting further away from once a week, it might work for some people, but I think it tends to start to get less optimal. And even from a scheduling and convenience point of view and a habitual point of view for clients, you've got to remember, trainers need to remember that 95% of your clients are not as into exercise as you are, and they need something to get them into the gym. And if it drifts longer than a week, it tends not to be something that people stick to. So if somebody's training once a week, I really don't think you have much play on the frequency side of things. On terms of the volume side of things, if they've had if all of those sort of lifestyle factors are out of whack and they're struggling to recover, I mean, I would be concerned about somebody struggling to recover from one workout a week of 6 to 8 exercises. If they're unable to sort of recover from that, I'd be concerned as to, what else is not happening for that person? Why are they not able to do that? Because I do think that's a sort of a minimum. If somebody's training twice a week with you, and I would typically have people train once or twice a week. And I think if somebody's training twice a week, now that's something where it can be more challenging because if somebody's really going to momentary muscular failure on a routine, I don't know, let's say of 5 to 8 exercises, and they're really pushing hard in that workout. If the lifestyle is good and stress levels are good and nutrition is good, that's very doable for most people. But once one or two of those things starts to come out of sync, that becomes less doable. And then that's where I would start to look at, okay, so this person might need to drop back to once a week. And one way I use to describe it with my clients is, your energy levels and your lifestyle and everything that's happening to you, your energy goes in waves. Sometimes the wave is high and it's cresting and you've got bags of energy and you could do 2, heck, you might even be able to do 3 workouts in a week if you really wanted to push it. Other times you're troughing and the wave is broken and you're on the downslope. And when you're in that trough, you may very well only cope well with only 1 workout a week. And it is nice to have the luxury of being dynamic like that. Now, the issue for trainers is that you don't typically want to have somebody who can be sort of a bit sketchy. So is it twice or is it once? And that can be an issue from a scheduling point of view, because if you're looking to get regular slots in, and you're sort of suggesting that, you can be kind of free and easy as you match your energy levels, you might find your diary sort of becomes a bit higgledy-piggledy, but that's really sort of in the nature of having that process. It worked for me. I would say, look, if you want to invest the time and finances in training twice a week, it can be really good for you. And it may be a little bit better than just doing it about once a week. And there may be times when you need to step back. And sometimes these things are inbuilt into our lives as well. So when it's Easter holidays, when it's Christmas holidays, when you go away for the summer, you sort of have these natural ebbs and flows and fluctuations anyway. Throw in, if somebody comes down with a cold or a flu once a year as well, and they need to take off a couple of weeks around that, you'll find that there are these natural ebbs and flows, and probably they can stick to sort of twice a week with those, summer holiday, Christmas holiday, Easter holiday, long weekend away somewhere active. So they might only come in once a week, a couple of times, or have a complete 14-day period off at times. And that there is a natural ebb and flow to it. So I think that is highly appropriate. That works really, really well for most people and sort of matches what's doable and sustainable over the long term. Then in terms of volume, I think for most people who are not coming from a place of being sort of having a chronic, low grade chronic illness or being unwell, most people can tolerate sort of that 5 to 8 exercises in a workout really well. And you don't really need to go up the scale, down the scale too much away from that kind of parameter. But you might want to push it, if you've got a particularly strong client or a particularly athletic client who really sort of tolerates exercise well, you might want to, push the volume up a little bit, get them, really adhering to that twice a week and see what happens for them. See, does it work better for them? Does it work less well for them? The other thing is you've got to consider is what else do they have going on outside of the gym? Are they engaged in a sport? Do they run? Do they play tennis? Do they play cricket? Do they play rugby? Do they play, are they engaged in other taxing physical exercise, which complicates the matter, or actually gives you a little bit more to get your teeth stuck into as well. So it comes down to lifestyle. I think, the one thing that's so awesome about this HIT approach is really, it's fantastic for just about everybody. And you don't have to deviate too far from it to get optimal results for the individual at hand. maybe one of the reasons you might taper it up or down a little bit too is psychological reasons. Maybe you have somebody you come in who's always been an athlete, who's been a triathlete, is used to doing a crap load of exercise, and you might need to have them on a little higher frequency just from a psychological purpose until you can segue them into this perspective on exercise. So there are those type of considerations as well.
That's awesome. And what about when if you have someone come and let's say they've been training for a while, you're still trying to figure out their optimal frequency and recovery requirements, things like that. If they come to a session and let's say maybe not the next session, but maybe 2 or 3 sessions in, you start seeing the numbers fall. You start seeing repetition count or time on the load to fall. Would you stop the workout and say go home? Or because obviously there are other benefits like disposal of glucose and insulin sensitivity and stuff like that. What do you do in those scenarios where you start seeing that someone is perhaps overtrained?
Okay. If I started to see that happening, sort of 10 weeks into working with somebody, 12 weeks into working with somebody, it might be the fact that they're getting better at recruiting and fatiguing their muscle tissue.
No.
So there can be a stalling on the loads because, okay, they got those initial jumps because you, as a trainer, you started off with a load that was relatively easy for them. You brought that up and now actually you're hitting what is a truly challenging load for them. And at the same time, they're developing the skill set where they can actually recruit and fatigue their tissue much, much better. So you might see a slowing down, if not a stalling for a period of time with somebody sort of that new to exercise or that new to this form of exercise. So I wouldn't be in a rush to have them drop in frequency or to do less in a session. Now, if you're saying we know for a fact that person is overtrained and they made it to the gym and I was taking them for a workout and I was seeing on my, the first 2-3 exercises, their times were lower, I might say, I would not send somebody home. I think that's something I would be really unlikely to do. What I might say is, everything you've told me and what I'm seeing suggests that, you've done too much. So for the next 3 exercises, as challenging as this is going to be for you now, I'm going to ask you to hold back for a momentary muscular failure by a couple of reps. Okay, so they're still going to get their full workout. They still feel they got the value of the workout session and it will have done something for them without really grinding them into the hard end zone, as it were, which if they are overtrained, they're going to struggle to recover from.
A last question before we wrap up, Simon, how do you differentiate between someone who has improved their ability to recruit muscle fiber and therefore be more efficient with their training, which might represent itself, as you were saying there, as a lower time on the load, versus someone just being overtrained? I mean, I don't know how, even in myself, I don't know how you figure that out. Is it just over a certain period of time or?
Well, I would, and I think, this goes back to a conversation we had when one of the times we first met, is I wouldn't jump to looking at the numbers, being suggestive of anything. I think we can be too quick to do that. And I'm sure it was Dr. McGuff who mentioned at one point, it's like those numbers week to week, don't get lost in the noise of those numbers because they will tell you stuff that isn't necessarily actually there physically. Look at them 6 weeks apart from each other. So you're seeing over the long term, is there a positive net effect? Because, you can have a couple of weeks where you might be a bit off because of stress or other things that were going on, or your mindset, your mental game wasn't 100% in the workout. And the following week from that, it was. If we look at that micro detail workout to workout, I think we're going to be too quick to try and use data in a way that it isn't actually telling us truly what's been happening holistically for the individual. Whereas if you pass that out over the longer term and look at a broader number of workouts and see the general trend, you could use your Google Sheets and plot that as a general trend chart and put the line through the middle. If that's on average going up then we know we're all good. And I think that's what to look out. That's what to look out for. I mean, real overtraining is a it's a seriously dysfunctional state to be in. That professional athletes typically suffer from, and will tend to take a lot, if they're genuinely overtrained, it will take them 3 months to a year to get out of overtraining. It's not something that's easily done. Unless that person outside of your workouts is going off and doing a ton of other stuff, physical stuff as well, in which case that's when I would start to look at it. Is like, what else are they doing physically outside of, our 1 or 2 sessions a week? I think somebody training once or twice a week and not doing much else physically, not taxing themselves much else physically, is rarely going to overtrain.
Good answer. Simon, I will let you go because I know you've got another appointment, but thank you so much again for contributing some great content to the membership. So this is part 2 on how to instruct the perfect high intensity training workout, with some extra stuff on progress there, which I've personally found really helpful. And you reminded me of our little, our first meeting in Starbucks there, which is a good memory. But yeah, I'll let you go now, and I'll talk to you soon, mate. Take care.
Lovely.